That sound is 2,500 years old. And one night in Tennessee, it almost stopped forever. May 19th, 1910. Half past midnight in South Pittsburgh, Tennessee. A spark escapes the cupola furnace of a small iron foundry, and the wooden buildings take it like kindling. By dawn, everything Joseph Lodge has spent 14 years building is ash. The sheds, the machines, and worst of all, the wooden patterns, every one carved by hand. His wife Lizzie writes one line in her diary that morning. Foundry burned down at 12:30 this morning. The insurance wouldn't come close. He was 62 years old. Every reasonable man in that town expected him to quit. Instead, Joseph Lodge went out and bought a meadow. What he built on that meadow is probably hanging in your kitchen right now. But before we get there, you're going to find out why the one rule your grandmother swore by, never wash it with soap, is completely wrong. And why the rusty, forgotten pan in your attic might be worth more than everything else on your stove combined. To understand what nearly died in that fire, you have to go back. A very long way back. The oldest cast iron we've ever dug up came out of the ground in Jiangsu province, China, and it dates to the 5th century before Christ. Understand what that means. While the rest of the world was still hammering iron, beating it into shape, one blow at a time, Chinese foundrymen had learned to do something that must have looked like sorcery. They melted it. They made iron pour, liquid metal, taking the shape of whatever mold you gave it. By the 3rd century BC, the technique was everywhere in the region, and Europe would not catch up for the better part of 2,000 years. And the first great cast iron cooking vessel? It wasn't for cooking. Those early woks, cast around 200 BC, were built for drying grain. The most famous pan in Asia spent its first 1,500 years working the harvest before anyone thought to stir-fry in it. From Jiangsu, the knowledge moves west, slowly, along trade roads, across 2,000 years, until it reaches a smoky little valley in Shropshire, England, called Coalbrookdale. And from Coalbrookdale, it crosses the Atlantic to a furnace at Saugus, Massachusetts, lit in 1642. The first ironworks in America. The skillet is coming, but somebody has to make it cheap enough to own. Abraham Darby was a brass man with an unreasonable idea, that a cast iron pot should not be a luxury. In 1707, he patented a method for casting iron thin, in sand molds he could use again and again, fired with coke instead of ruinously expensive charcoal. It sounds like a footnote. It was a revolution. Overnight, a cooking pot went from something a household saved for to something a household simply had. And people understood the stakes better than we do now. It's often quoted that Adam Smith, the father of economics himself, judged a nation's wealth less by the gold in its treasury than by the pots and pans in its kitchens. Whether or not he put it quite that way, the sentiment was literally true for most families alive at the time. Your cookware was your capital. It was willed, it was inventoried, it was fought over. And that furnace at Coalbrookdale? Darby's family ironworks would go on to cast the iron that built the first iron bridge in the world and lit the Industrial Revolution. The modern world started as a frying pan. Here's something almost nobody notices. For most of its life in America, the skillet did not look like yours. It stood on 3 tall legs with a long handle, built to straddle a bed of coals on an open hearth, because that's where cooking happened. And it had a name. They called it a spider, for the obvious reason, a round black body up on stilty legs. It's an American word. The earliest one we can point to is an advertisement in the Pennsylvania Packet in 1790, offering for sale bake pans, spiders, skillets. And these things were treasured. We know because we have the wills. Colonial estates listed iron pots and Dutch ovens by name and left them to specific children, right alongside the land and the livestock. The hand-me-down skillet is older than the United States. Then, in the middle of the 1800s, something arrived that changed every kitchen in America: the cast iron cooking stove. A flat, hot, enclosed surface. No more coals, No more crouching at a hearth. And on a flat stovetop, 3 legs aren't a feature. They're a problem. So they came off. The flat-bottomed skillet, the exact object hanging in your kitchen tonight, wasn't born from a flash of genius. It was born because the furniture changed. That stove left one more fingerprint, and it's sitting on the bottom of every old pan in America. Flip one over. There's a number cast into it. An 8, a 10, a 12. Almost everyone assumes it's the size in inches. Go measure one. It isn't. That number told you which eye of your wood stove the pan was cast to drop into. A number 8 skillet fit a number 8 stove hole. The stoves are a century gone. The numbers never left. Now, the South took to cast iron harder than anywhere else in this country. And if you've cooked down here, you know exactly why. It isn't nostalgia. It's physics. Try to make a dark roux in a thin pan. Go ahead. You need flour and fat held at a steady heat for 45 minutes or more, stirred without stopping, carried from blonde to peanut to copper to something close to chocolate. And the second that pan develops a hot spot, you've got scorched flour and a batch you have to throw out and start over. There's no rescuing it. Every Gulf Coast cook learns that the hard way, once. A cast iron pot doesn't spike, it holds. That mass that makes the thing miserable to lift is exactly what makes a roux possible. And a roux is the foundation the whole Creole and Cajun kitchen is built on. Gumbo, étouffée, sauce piquante. Down here, the iron pot isn't a piece of equipment, it's a prerequisite. 1867. A 19-year-old from Pennsylvania named Joseph Lodge boards a steamship and works his way down the Ohio River. Somewhere near Louisville, he sits down to a meal and writes a line in his diary that lands differently once you know how the story ends. I have the first cornbread here I ever ate. The first cornbread he ever ate. A Pittsburgh Yankee, tasting it for the first time at 19, and his name would end up cast into the bottom of the pan the American South bakes its cornbread in. He chased ironwork for a decade after that, across the country and overseas, and in 1877, he settled where the railroad met the Tennessee River, South Pittsburgh. In 1896, at 48 years old, he finally opened a foundry of his own. And he didn't put his own name on it. He called it the Blacklock Foundry, after his closest friend, Joseph Hayton Blacklock, the local Episcopal minister. That congregation had begun 20 years earlier, when a few English foundrymen gathered to worship in the pattern room of an ironworks, among the carved wooden shapes that every iron pot on earth begins as. Which brings us back to that night in May. The spark from the cupola, the wooden buildings, the hand-carved patterns burning, Lizzie's one sentence in the diary, the insurance that wasn't enough. Here is what Joseph Lodge did next, and it's the reason there's a company to talk about it all. He bought a meadow a few blocks south of the Ashes for $6,000. He reorganized the business, this time under his own name, Lodge Manufacturing. And on August 26, 1910, 99 days after the fire, they poured the first castings on the new site. By October, the foundry was running at full capacity. That meadow is where Lodge cast iron is still made this afternoon. Same town since 1896, same ground since the summer after the fire. And the fire, as it turns out, wasn't the hardest thing coming. When the Depression hit, cookware orders simply stopped. Nobody was buying skillets. As the family tells it, Lodge kept the furnaces lit by casting things nobody needed and everybody wanted. Garden gnomes. Gnomes, animal doorstops, little cast iron novelties, anything to keep the crews on the payroll. Whether the gnomes truly carried the company or the family's stubbornness did, the outcome is the same. While banks were failing up and down that valley, the foundry never went cold. Hold on to that. Because the Depression didn't kill a single American cast iron foundry, and what came next killed almost all of them. Quick, settle something in the comments before we go on. How were you taught to clean a cast iron skillet? Soap or never soap? Vote now and be honest, because in a few minutes the science is going to pick a side, and half of you are about to be very unhappy with me. Erie, Pennsylvania. Since 1865, a company called Griswold had been making what collectors still consider the finest cast iron this country ever produced. Pans ground so smooth inside they feel like polished stone. For 90 years, Griswold was the name. By the 1940s, it was in trouble. Labor fights, thinning margins, quality slipping. The founding family sold out in 1946. In March of 1957, the company was bought and carved up, and the Griswold name was handed to its oldest rival, Wagner of Sydney, Ohio. That December, the Erie plant went dark after 92 years. Erie, Pennsylvania, 1957. Dark. Sydney, Ohio. Wagner outlived the rival it swallowed by barely 40 years and closed in 1999. Dark. Wapak. Favorite. Birmingham. Dark, dark, dark. One after another, the great American foundries went quiet. And when the smoke cleared, of all of them, one light was still burning. A meadow in South Pittsburgh, Tennessee. So what did it? Not the Depression, not the wars. A miracle out of a chemistry lab. In the 1950s and 60s, Teflon-coated aluminum arrived in American kitchens. Feather-light, cheap, and effortless. Nothing stuck. Nothing needed seasoning. Nothing needed learning. Next to that, a 15-pound black pan your mother made you scrub looked like a relic, and a whole generation put theirs in the garage. An industry that had survived the Civil War, 2 world wars, and the Great Depression was killed in about 15 years by a non-stick coating, and Lodge was cornered too. Their pans still shipped raw, coated in wax. You had to scrub that off and season the iron yourself before you could cook a single egg in it. In a Teflon world, that was a death sentence written in instructions nobody wanted to read. So in June of 2002, at a trade show in San Francisco, Lodge did something no major American manufacturer had ever done. They sold cast iron that came already seasoned. Out of the box, black, ready to cook. It sounds like a small thing. It saved the category. The barrier that had been scaring people off for 50 years just vanished. Every competitor followed, and a design older than the country started outselling space-age cookware all over again. Which brings us back to the vote. Team Never Soap, I'm sorry, you're wrong, and I can tell you exactly when you stop being right. The rule was true once. Old soap was made with lye, and lye genuinely destroys seasoning. It saponifies the fat right off the metal. But household soap stopped being made that way around the 1930s. Your grandmother inherited a rule that had already expired. And here's the part that makes it obvious, once you know what seasoning actually is. It is not a coat of old grease. When oil is heated past its smoke point on iron, the molecules cross-link. They polymerize into a hard, bonded layer more like plastic than fat. Food scientists have tested this directly. Dish soap doesn't touch it. Grandma's black pan was never dirty. It was armored. 3 more, fast. Cast iron heats evenly, false, and backwards. Iron is a mediocre conductor. What it does is hold heat, and that's why it sears like nothing else in your kitchen. Metal utensils will ruin it. No, that polymerized layer is tougher than any non-stick coating ever made. And flaxseed oil, the internet's favorite seasoning oil, it builds a beautiful glassy finish that turns brittle and flakes off in sheets. Use something boring. One for the collectors. Those pans stamped Erie with no other name? Everyone assumes they're pre-Griswold. They are Griswold, the company's own early mark. Which brings us, finally, to your attic. The dead brands didn't disappear. They moved to the collector's market, and the numbers there are genuinely absurd. A Griswold slant logo Erie skillet that traded for about $50 in 2012 was bringing $800 a decade later. A big Griswold number 14 sold recently for over $3,000. And a rare Erie spider skillet, one of those original 3-legged hearth pans, hammered at auction for $10,000. And second, the miracle got a second look. As concerns spread about the forever chemicals in non-stick coatings when they're overheated or scratched, millions of people went looking for a pan with nothing to hide. And there it was, in the garage where they'd left it. Bare iron. Nothing coated, nothing to flake, nothing to break down. The only thing a cast iron pan leaches into your food is a trace of iron. Teflon nearly killed a 2,500-year-old technology. Then Teflon's own reckoning brought it back. So here's what I keep coming back to. Your non-stick pan has a lifespan of about 5 years, and then it goes in a landfill. A cast iron skillet has no lifespan at all. Colonists willed them to their children by name. Joseph Lodge's descendants are still pouring iron on his meadow, 130 years after the fire that should have ended it. And somewhere in your family there is a pan with 50 years of Sunday dinners polymerized into its face. A finish that is, quite literally, armor made of memory. That sound we started with, batter hitting hot grease, is the oldest, unbroken sound in the American kitchen. Somebody cooked that way 25 centuries ago. Somebody will cook that way after all of us. Cast iron doesn't get used up. It gets handed down. If that's your kitchen, the whole hand-me-down tradition, restoring an inherited pan, seasoning it right, and the recipes it was built for, is in our cast iron cookbook, linked below. Here are 2 of them, on the house. The Cornbread and the Roux. Then settle the fight for me. Smooth vintage Griswold or modern rough-cast Lodge. Which one actually cooks better? And tell me who your skillet came from. Grandmother, flea market, or fresh out of the box. And if you want to steer where we dig next, say the word. The croissant that isn't French, or the hamburger 4 different cities swear they invented.